What's up, everyone? This is Josh Kriger, one of the co-hosts at Edge of NFT, and I am excited to talk with a few amazing folks today about generative art and what it's all about and where is it going. It has sort of hit the mainstream in a big way, and I'm excited to just unpack that conversation topic a little bit more. I have Sasha and Justin Wu with us today, having this conversation. And let's just kick it off by introducing them to you all a little bit. Shasha, tell us about yourself and what gets you pumped about generative art.
Hi, I'm Sasha. I work for API3. I just quickly edited my name because I realized both of you had your associations on there as well. Sorry, the question was what gets me excited about generative art?
Just tell us a little bit about yourself
Okay.
and your background and what gets you excited about this topic.
Okay, I'm Sasha. I'm one of the co-founders of API3, and we work on getting API data onto the blockchain and hopefully powering some NFT projects in the future. What gets me excited about generative art? I'll try to keep it brief, but I've always been passionate about art, but I come from a computer science background, and I find generative art just this incredible fusion of the two. And I feel like, and when I talk about generative art, I'm kind of talking about things that like Art Blocks does and Autoglyphs as well. Um, it just feels like currently the most natural form of art on the blockchain, and it just seems like the people that do this kind of art really utilize the blockchain as a medium, which I find exciting as an art form.
Right on. And Justin, you don't really need an introduction. This is your conference, but clearly you've made a decision to go deeper in the NFT space with specific NFT events. What was the basis of that for you?
So for me, NFT's just been mostly I've been on the gaming side, so I've always been collecting assets and virtual items, whether it be on Steam, World of Warcraft, Ragnarok Online, and other games as well too. So my interest specifically about NFTs is just virtual collectibles, assets, and the metaverse.
And how did you come across generative NFTs for the first time, and how do those fit into your perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I saw it in the early days when it first popped up, but I didn't really dive too much deep into it. Still, I'd still consider myself a little bit late bloomer into the generative NFTs. But overall, I started seeing where people started to, do all the profile picture swaps, and people starting to collect these as a little collective and social, kind of almost even a social DAO as well too. And that's when I started clicking where, these are here to stay, and now you got to keep my eyes open on what's next, what's dropping.
Right on. And Sasha, what about you? When did you sort of stumble upon generative art and the application of generative art to NFTs?
It's actually kind of funny. A couple of months ago, one of my coworkers was supposed to do a presentation at an NFT conference about generative art, and he had to back out 2 weeks before. So I had to present, and I had to do all the research to actually figure out what this stuff is and how we fit into the picture. But the thing that really clicked for me was autoglyphs. And if you look at autoglyphs just aesthetically, it looks very simple and minimalistic. But if you see how it's generated, it's actually just a work of genius. Like autoglyphs, if for people not familiar, it's generated entirely by a smart contract. So the code that generates the artwork is done entirely on a smart contract, and the actual art, or the instructions for creating the art, is stored on chain with a bunch of like ASCII symbols, and that's like instructions for directly translating it into a piece of artwork. And they're very symmetrical, kind of very simple aesthetic looking pieces. Um, but I just recognize the genius of working with the limitations of a smart contract. Like nowadays, programmers that don't code on the blockchain they're never limited by the size of their programs. Like it's not a limitation for regular software engineers, but for blockchain engineers, you're limited by how much code you can actually write in a smart contract. You're also limited by how much computation power, because you're paying for it. So just the fact that these people could create like, I mean, theoretically they could create billions of these art pieces with this little piece of code, but obviously I think only like 100, I want to say like 1,000 were generated, and they're all so unique and aesthetic. So I just recognize the genius of really working with the limitations of the blockchain. That felt like it was the most, it really represented using the blockchain as a medium instead of just something to store art. They're actually using it as a medium, and I was just that's when it clicked for me, that particular project.
Yeah, I had a similar sort of epiphany moment, if you will. I of course familiar with CryptoKitties. Met Mac in DC or in LA at a bar after he had broke Ethereum, so to speak, and got to know what he was up to, and it sort of clicked for me a little bit more though when earlier this year in Venice, California, I got to know the Bright Moments crew and what they were doing with crypto Venetians, where they had these generative pieces, these fun representatives of Venice culture. If anyone's been to Venice, California, it's definitely one of those weirder, unique spots with an interesting vibe. And they created all 1,000 different unique crypto Venetians, and started to do some podcasts with them for Edge of NFT, and met Jeff Davis, who's one of the founders of Artblocks, there, and they were using Artblocks to power that project, and they've done other projects with Artblocks. And I have never really thought about this intersection of technology and art as art in itself. You think of technology powering art, or art that displays, or art that sort of is displayed in a technical way. But this idea of these two channels literally combining forces to create something bigger than either one of those, for me was like a big aha moment. So you spoke about research. So I had to do a little research to get ready for this panel. And I was really actually curious, guys, when did generative art first start? Like when did this concept even come about? So Justin, any guess? Want to pick a decade?
When it actually started, I don't actually. Yeah.
Just
yeah, when it started, probably I don't know. In the, I'll just say 90s.
All right, so that's what I thought. It's fun to put you on the spot. So it's actually the late 1950s is when artists and designers began to experiment with mechanical devices and analog computers. So this actually served as a precursor to the work of the digital pioneers in the 1960s. And interestingly enough, these early pioneers were not only artists or designers, but they were engineers and scientists. And they had access to more powerful computing resources at university scientific research labs. So I thought that was super interesting. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was actually we recently, within API 3, we have these discussion groups where we talk about all sorts of crypto related things once a week, and our designer, our UX designer, she wasn't familiar with the generative art space within the NFT space. And she said what we were discussing with regards to kind of what I mentioned about all the constraints of the blockchain having to be really, really creative to make anything aesthetic within these constraints. And she was like, this reminds me of like the early graphic art, like being so limited by what a computer could do, what it could display, how much processing power it had. Like you had to think so creatively within those constraints. So I don't come from that graphics background, but I'm kind of relaying what our graphics designer was saying when we were talking about generative art.
That makes sense to me. I'm thinking about my conversation with Fred Kriger from Proton, one of the co-founders of Proton. And he was the guy that invented layers in Paint Shop Pro. And when you think about so maybe Justin, when you were thinking 90s, you were thinking Paint Shop Pro, because that was in a sense another foundation element. It's taking those layers, and then instead of you creating it as the artist and painting on top of it, starting to get into algorithms and computer programming to then sort of do fun things with those different layers, right?
Yeah, I think it's super. I think that was my initial thoughts of that, but I didn't think about like the early days of computing. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure people were messing around and dealing with it too.
Totally. So here's the thing, and for every person that's really excited about NFTs and generative art, there's a naysayer, and critics do argue that because the artist is relinquishing physical control of the work by allowing a machine to complete it, the finished product is far from art, especially if it doesn't look like traditional art. And I would actually argue that defining an artwork in code, like you said, Sasha, requires a high level of imagination. So I'm curious what your own thoughts and experiences are here.
I feel like I could talk about this for hours, but I think for the naysayers, I would just present them with good generative art versus bad generative art, because like you don't have to be an art historian, or you can just be a layman and tell like something like Fidenza, like and understanding the underlying algorithm, comparing that to I won't name names for bad generative art, but like it's something you can just tell intuitively like what actually like requires an extreme ingenuity and what doesn't. um, but also I find kind of generative art interesting because you strip out all the mechanical parts of art making, because I mean, other than painting, like with graphic design, there are very parts of it that are very mechanical and algorithmic. Like even designers, they're not always creating completely unique art. They reuse a bunch of standard templates and whatnot. So with generative art, you kind of explicitly strip out the really mechanical part of the art making, and you're left. I would argue you're left to think, how do I still make something unique while I'm not explaining this very well. You're being very explicit about the automated part, but then the creative part becomes more explicit when you split those two out. I don't know if I explained that well,
No,
but
no, I think that's one way of explaining this higher level of creativity that you can sort of be
yeah.
super focused on. And an analogy that came to mind is my girlfriend's brother's a neurosurgeon, and now he has this multi-million-dollar robot that's helping him. But essentially, it sort of allows him to focus in on exactly the procedure that he needs to do and not get distracted by these external factors, right?
That's exactly what I was trying to explain. So thank you for understanding. Yeah.
I got you. Justin, what are your thoughts? How do you talk about generative art in all these 10,000 and 5,000 piece collections to folks that think this is just hype?
Yeah, well, I mean, like what we're seeing, I mean, with I'm still kind of like understanding like all the different PFPs and people's interests there. Obviously, people what we're seeing, in my opinion, is if I guess this is blend between art, utility, and even just even rarity as well too. Sometimes the PFP pieces or collective pieces could just go get people's interest because of the rarity. But I think what's super interesting though, based off the generative art, is that people are um, not really caring that a AI or the smart contract or the code is actually generating it. If it is something that they can actually get a piece of and be part of it as well. I think that starts to extend beyond just like how it was created. I mean, well, the fact that it was also just randomly, by chance, randomly created, goes back into like what we've seen in like the gamer and gaming side too. And so that's why I think that's really resonating a lot with PFP collectors, especially that mesh and blend between PFP collectors and the gaming world, where technically all the assets and stuff in there are sometimes generated by chance numbers and code behind the scenes as well too. So I understand though from the perspective from the art collectors maybe, or the artists that are used to more like hand drawn or more like actual handmade art pieces, that generative art that's created by code, um, it's always up for debate. And same thing too. Like I think even the law and people's perception just haven't fully caught up with it. But like, is IP and copyrights and ideas created by an AI, is that actually defensible or not? And then in the future, is if somebody has like a quantum computer, are they going to create all the possible art pieces in the world? I don't know. That's just like mind blowing stuff. And then
Wow,
do they
I never
also,
thought about that,
right? Well,
but
then
that
I don't know. Like it's possible though, right? Potentially with quantum, they could just generate like all the possible combinations and just own the copyrights for it and block you out as well too. So these are still stuff that is like super bleeding edge, and I think that we'll have to, society and culturally also, we just have to either figure out how to accept or navigate and traverse through this too. So
yeah, I'd love to talk about that a little bit more. But one thing that you made me think about is let's look at Jackson Pollock, a highly regarded artist whose pieces sell for millions of dollars. Um, there's an element of chance in his work. When he splashes paint on a canvas, he doesn't know exactly where it's going to go, and how big those globules are going to be and how the colors are going to interact. I mean, I personally see randomness in that as well. And I think that the randomness of nature is sort of personified in art and now in technology. When every time we walk through a beautiful up a mountain or hike or go through a beautiful forest, the trees are all located in different ways because the wind is blowing. You take a picture, that picture is unique in that place and time, and there's an element of randomness in life, right? Just to get a little bit heady and philosophical here.
No,
definitely.
yeah, I really like that point, and I think you explained it. Something I've been thinking about, why generative art within the NFT space particularly interests me, and I think it's because it has that kind of, I don't know what you call it, like immediacy, randomness, something a bit natural about it. That I mean, I think the NFT space is interesting in general, but the generative space really brings that artistic quality that you're talking about.
What are
For me,
you excited about, going forward in the space? What are the trends that you're seeing that you think could be interesting?
for me,
Yeah.
well, the NFT space in general, I mean, I could go in so many ways, kind of
Oh,
like
more like generative art.
yeah, that's what I was saying. So specifically in terms of the kind of art aspect, something I've been thinking about. I'd actually like to hear your thoughts on this. But so currently, what's the word? Rareness is programmed into the parameters. Like some configurations are more rare than others. Some color palettes are more rare, and that's coded in. Like that's decided beforehand. Yeah, the mint is random, but the probability distribution is decided by the artist. So that's how so rareness is coded in by the artist. So I was wondering, just because I work in the crypto space where we try to bring off-chain data on chain, I was wondering if there was ways or if there'd be interest in minting NFTs, not triggered by a random number, but triggered by some off-chain event, like some rare market event, some rare weather occurrence, an election, a sporting event, and have that trigger the creation of an NFT, because then the rareness is you're taking off-chain rareness and kind of embedding it in an NFT versus kind of coding in the rareness. Someone mentioned, a friend of mine mentioned that I think there are some projects that do this with sporting matches, or I've heard of people talking about this, but that just particularly interests me because I work in the kind of data space.
Yeah, I think that that's possible, and someone's probably working on something like that. It makes sense to me that you could even have, the results of a sporting event change in NFT,
Yeah.
and do that sort of thing. And recently I heard about generative NFTs that have souls, and those souls evolve based on how you program your soul by talking to it.
What's that program? What's that project called? It sounds interesting.
It's called Mirror World. So we
Yeah.
just are doing a contest with them right now. Pretty cool. I'll throw some things in the mix that I think are interesting. One of them is, generative NFTs that have additional utility in the real world. I think that's something that we've seen time and time again, sort of become more important. I think that's a trend that's it's going to make this more than a fad, increase the value over time. Um, Traits that can be moved from one NFT to another. So maybe your NFT gets glasses, but you don't like glasses, or you want the glasses to change. So it could be regenerative in that sense of the word. I think it's interesting, NFTs that evolve over time, generative NFTs that mature over time. That's a trend that I've seen recently, and it sort of interests me. Justin, what have you seen in the space in terms of generative art, and what do you think could be the next sort of evolution of it?
Yeah, obviously we're going through the phases where it's just like everyone's dropping like the initial mint collectibles. Next phase after that is like the DAOs or collective groups, whether that be through people making NFT vaults, DAOs that are owning other NFTs, collectives, Discord memberships, etc. Next phase is everybody right now is doing metaverse, but that's not as easy. But I think as more games pop up, then people will start wanting to take their bored apes and move it into a game, in all different games. So it's just like the asset is living, or the skin is living across all the different uh, territories or games or metaverses, I should say. Then after that, we're starting seeing other interesting combinations of like NFTs generating other NFTs, and some sort of like spawning or crazy token economics or gamification, with like the bored apes spawning out different mutant vials to then creating mutants. We're seeing a lot of different variations of that as well too. Some even super crazy one group called Punks Comics or Punks Vaults. They have a super deep multi-layer NFTs, and it's just like a choose your own adventure. Like you can actually go two different directions with the NFT. One direction will get you to a different NFT, but will burn that NFT, and then that creates rarity on the top level. While you go to this next level, that's also rare because you're the one of the few people that actually went down that path, and then it continues to keep branching as well too. So I think we're super early on how we're looking at this.
Yeah, I think on that topic, the Sevens and then Frogland, two projects that I think are respectively cool and sleepers in the space. They have invisible aspects of their metadata that is not yet properties that can be fully translated into OpenSea, for example, where perhaps your NFT has some personality trait as well, and how that trait sort of applies to a future game is really interesting. You could have a sad NFT or a happy NFT. So I think giving these generative art pieces personality traits is interesting. And then, back to your gaming world, NFTs that have different scores on strength and power and style, and how that applies to their performance in a game is something that I think is really interesting. Sasha, any closing thoughts before we wrap here in terms of sleeper projects or things that you're looking forward to?
Not in terms of sleeper projects. I can't think of. I don't follow the space that closely. I kind of just zone into the ones that interest me. So like I follow art blocks very closely, and sort of derivatives of that. But
cool. Yeah. I mean, I think it's helpful to have focus, right? There's thousands of amazing projects right now in the space, and Justin, you're into the gaming ones that are generative, and Sasha, you have your focus on art blocks.
I'm artsy.
Yeah. So for those of you that are like overwhelmed by the possibilities, just gravitate towards what you love, right? And start there and go down the rabbit hole. You don't have to understand the entire generative art space in one day. And even those that are in it deep don't see all the different possibilities, because it's sort of splintering in so many different directions so fast. So you have to kind of suspend that feeling of of wanting to understand everything, which is, a natural feeling when you go into a new area and you start to research. And it's really impossible here because the possibilities are endless. So super fun to chat with you both. And on this topic. And I'm sure next week there'll be new updates for everyone that we haven't even talked about today. But in the meantime, Sasha, how can folks stay in touch with you and get to know your project and your thoughts on the space?
If in terms of my project, so API 3, I think it's just easiest to Google us and you'll find our website and all our social platforms. We write a lot on Medium. I write a lot on Medium, to be honest, about the crypto space in general, not just NFTs. I'm more on the technical side, but I do a bit of cultural stuff too. So if you Google my name, SASAMILIC, Medium, you'll find my Medium.
Cool.
Yes.
And Justin, you have a very well-branded Twitter handle. Feel free to share that with folks.
Yeah, you can find us at DeFi Summit, or mine is Hackerpreneur, like hackathon entrepreneur, just hacking away at things. But happy to host everybody here and be in touch.
Yep. And for me, my Twitter handle is at Josh Kriger, Kriger. And primarily, you can track us with Edge of NFT, which you can Google. We're on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're on Twitter, just about everywhere. It's at Edge of NFT. We just celebrated 50 episodes with Dapper Labs. We've given away probably over $30,000 of NFTs at this point, and you can get in that mix by subscribing to our newsletter and keeping up with us as we follow along and what's next in this fun world of generative NFTs and NFTs in general. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of this NFTCon session.
Thank you so much, Josh.